wanted to have a bit of a chat for something that I've seen happen a lot. And
Well, I never thought I'd be doing this, but yeah, I mean, let's have a chat. So, we are going to start with a couple disclaimers. Firstly, I don't have a problem with the overall message of Suris' video. It's more the fact that while he acknowledges a larger cultural problem, or at least makes nods towards it, he doesn't really address the larger cultural problem at hand, and I feel that is a larger cultural problem that needs to be addressed. Secondly, if you do not have the spoons or the mental health or the interest in dealing with the larger cultural problem and just want an individual, take on this issue, go see Suris' video. I feel like that's very much what that's geared towards. But once again, there is a larger cultural issue at hand that I feel that I should address. Third and final disclaimer, this channel is very much built on the foundation of promoting media literacy, fighting censorship, and commentating on how culture consumes and handles media at large. For those of you who follow this channel, we got our start, or I got my start on this channel, commentating on how evangelicals petition Netflix to cancel Good Omens, even though it's an Amazon Prime show. And it very much started off as a way fundamental evangelicals, or fundagelicals, as I like to say, interact with culture at large, and then kind of largely grew into promoting cultural literacy and media literacy. With that, the reason I'm listing this as a disclaimer is I am airing my biases, and you cannot commentate on media and culture without being biased. There's really no such thing as an objective take on media and culture. Except that Waterworld is bad, yet I still love it. But that's besides the point. So, just so you know, this is the set of biases I am coming forward with in my response to Suris' video. There is a larger cultural issue at hand, and it's not being addressed, so I'm addressing it through the lens of a response to Suris' video. So, without further ado, let's get really into the meat and potatoes of this.
it's something that seems like really innocuous, right? It's something that we all kind of take for granted after a certain point, but I think it's still important to talk about regardless, because there's always going to be that one person, right, who needs to hear this. How many of you have been told to act your age or abandon kid things, etc.? Like, let's say you like playing video games, or you like playing trading card games, or you like watching cartoons.
So, in a nutshell, that is an apt description of what I like to call the juvenilization of media, for lack of a better term, where we as a society, particularly the US, though, since the US has such a monopoly on culture throughout the Anglosphere, it may, have leached out into other English-speaking countries where we as a society have labeled certain mediums, particularly animation, comic books, and video games, as just for kids. Now that in and of itself is a problem, but there is a wider dismissal issue that compiles that problem, in that we don't really view media that's just for kids as having any kind of artistic value in and of itself. And I'm going to put a pin in that because it ties in well to one of the arguments that Suris covers in his video, so I'm going to put a pin in that until that argument comes up. But that's largely born of a cultural attitude toward, the cultural attitude towards children's media, I feel, comes from the larger cultural attitude that, children aren't people. We like, especially when it comes to more, conservative and fundamentalist mindsets, you don't really view children as people. You kind of view children as empty vessels to be, within which your ideology can germinate and spread onto further generations. That, this is why we see, why so many of the banned books are children's books, and so many of the banned book attempts come from the right. Juvenilization of media is a problem because it makes media easier to censor. Because you say, oh, this medium is for children, X shouldn't be in such medium, so let's make sure that, such media are either blatantly propagandizing our mindset or are, essentially harmless path.
First thing we tend to do is we tend to grab media of ours that we don't think is meant for kids and show them to the person to say, hey, this media is for everybody. This media is not just meant for kids.
And I agree that this is a bad response because it plays into the wider cultural attitude that media meant for children, children's media, is, doesn't have anything of artistic or literary value to it. So, and also, like, in the terms of comics, where you're talking, when you try to, oh, you think comics are kids, or for kids, just read Watchmen, or just read Frank Miller's The Dark Knight. What you yourself are ignoring is the fact that those were backlashes against the, decades of censorship under the Comics Code Authority. Dark Knight, things like, Watchmen, things like The Killing Joke, which Alan Moore didn't actually intend to become DC canon, but everyone latched onto it, so DC is like, yeah, it's canon. But those were meant to be satires of, the comics of the Silver Age. They were meant to be a backlash, a rebellion against the, G-rated, family-friendly, kiddie comics that came out during the Silver Age under the, the Comics Code Authority. And the fact that this hasn't been, this wasn't taken in that context bred the wider idea that if something in a medium that is, usually marketed towards children has, is going to have any artistic value, it's got to be bloodied up, it's got to be gored up, it's got to be sexed up, it's got to be, NC-17, we've got to make it explicitly just for adults to, for it to act, for it to be a big boy comic. Now, I do agree with the idea of, separating comics on, something of a rating system, because there are topics and ways to explore various aspects of the human condition that can get a bit much for younger minds. But just because you have a mature line doesn't mean, the regular comic line doesn't have anything of artistic value. I mean, the X-Men were still covering civil rights issues under Marvel's, regular line, mainstream line. Green Arrow and, the Green Arrow, Green Lantern crossover of the 70s was still covering civil rights issues, and hell, Snowbirds Don't Fly, which was all about drug abuse, was released on, the mainstream DC line. It wasn't released under Vertigo, which is their, adult, line of comics. But this attitude that a medium, especially a medium that is usually targeted towards younger audiences, can only have artistic value if it's full of swearing, if it's full of blood, if it's, if it's amped up to an R level, is a bad attitude. It effectively makes adult comics an adult media in, adult animation, especially Western produced adult animation. I haven't really seen this problem coming out of anime, but to be fair, I'm not too familiar with anime. I get back on me, Vagrant, get back to me, Vagrant Sam or Suris, if you see this. But I feel that anime and manga don't really have this issue because, the cultural attitudes in Japan are different, and they didn't really have the problem of, juvenilizing their media the way America does. But this attitude where to make things, appreciated by adults, you have to punch up the violence, you have to punch up the swears, you have to punch up the sex, gets things, effectively dematures the mature content, because, you're not really exploring anything. You can explore deep topics while having a bunch of blood, sex, and and etc. But having those topics, but a lot of times, from what I've seen in America, in Western produced media, is where if someone is going to make, an animated show or a comic book or a video game directed at adult audiences, with some notable exceptions, they're going to focus on upping the violence, upping the sex, or upping the swearing, and while some TNA and fuck bombs are appreciated, they serve their own artistic purpose. Focusing solely on those is what I feel cheapens the idea of having mature discussions in such juvenilized media. Basically you get to the problem where oh yeah, that's definitely not for kids, but is it also really for adults? But I find it very telling that the only graphic novel to receive acknowledgement of literary merit, outside of its field, in this example, a Pulitzer Prize, was Mouse, which is about the Holocaust. And even so, the McMahon County School Board in Tennessee wanted to, integrate Mouse into their curriculum because they were going to do a module on graphic novels, and other classes were going to do modules on the Holocaust, and it's, it's a very synthesized system. But yet, the McMahon County School Board banned Mouse from appearing in their curriculum because it was a graphic novel and thus for kids, and because it covered the Holocaust, it was found to be unsuitable for kids. So, and this is what I mean where I say juvenilization of media only aids in attempts at censorship, and how our attitudes of juvenilized media as having no artistic value inherent to itself really harms us as a culture who values the free exchange of information, and also it harms the media, the mediums, the media as a whole, because when you're put in a state where you don't really have any acknowledgement of artistic value, where you have a strict set of limitations because you're expected to turn all your attentions to producing content for children, because you're working in animation, because you're making comic books, that leads to a stagnant, that leads to that media stagnating. Like, the first breath of fresh air that the comics book industry had, at the end of the Silver Age, was the Moore Miller Dark Era, or the Bronze Age. But that was because Moore and Miller were getting accolades for satirizing the Silver Age, but everyone was focused on, they're doing the dark, ultra-violent, gritty stuff, let's just copy them, and we didn't really get a response to that movement until Grant Morrison's, Superman versus the Elite. So, all this information overload aside, the idea of pointing to hey, this is made for adults and thus has an artistic value doesn't work as an argument. I agree with Suris that it doesn't work as an argument because you're working on the same cultural, assumptions that if a piece of medium is to have artistic value, it's got to be directed exclusively at adults. But, Disney took a decade establishing the artistic credentials of cinematic animation during the Disney Renaissance. And, finally the Academy is like, okay, well, we're going to do an Oscar award for the best animated picture. I agree that, animation is a different enough beast from live action that it warrants its own special award. However, the fact that when Black Panther came out and there was the immense upwelling of pressure from the people to give it at least a nomination for Best Picture, because Black Panther did do things to expand the art form, because it was a blockbuster, and because it was a comic book movie, more importantly because it was a comic book movie, the Oscars resisted and finally gave in, and then announced, hey, what if we have a best popular picture category for the future, and that's the one that we can shove all of these superhero movies that are popping out into, which which begs the question, is that how the Academy felt about animation? Did they feel that it wasn't its own medium worthy of its own considerations, that it was that wasn't a different enough beast from live action cinema to be considered under its own awards? Did they just want to put animation at the kiddie table so it would stop mucking up their big important pictures? And so the question is, what do we do about this? Because, like I said, Suris's response to the problem, or to the larger problem of juvenilization of media, or rather how it's reflected in people approaching you and saying, why are you reading comic books? Why are you watching animation? Why are you playing video games? You need to grow up. That's for kids. Is a very individualized, a very individualistic, do this for your mental health approach. My approach, necessitates, as someone who advocates for media literacy, who advocates for the right of all art to be seen as art. What do I suggest, and why? I mean, who am I? I'm planked in this wider content sphere. But if you have the mental health for it, if you have the spoons for it, then advocate for the artistic merit of the media that you enjoy. Because if you've seen Media Musings, every time, without fail, whenever we cover an animated movie, we go that someone on the panel says, wow, this is really deeper than what I had expected from a kids movie. Because people who work in animation work are working on expressing themselves artistically. People consume and consume and produce media. That's what makes us people. It's like, as far as I can tell, that is the main thing that defines Homo sapiens sapiens as Homo sapiens sapiens. I mean, we are the animals that make art. We are the animals that produce and consume media, and this artistic interchange of ideas is something essential to our personal and wider cultural psyches. So advocate, if you feel like you have the mental health, and if you feel like you have the spoons, and if you feel like this is an important enough topic, advocate for the artistic merits of the media that you consume. And like I said, it is okay to consume media that doesn't have any artistic merits. I enjoy Waterworld. I unironically enjoy Waterworld, even though I know it's a garbage movie. We all have our guilty pleasures. I was going to go into how this interacts with the far right, how this interacts with the evangelical right, and the wider, religious conservative movement in the U.S. and the Anglosphere as a whole, but we're already going well into time, so maybe I'll make that another video, who knows. All I have to say is, remember, indoctrination is a hell of a drug. Then a crowd of young boys, they're a fooling around in the corner, drunk and dressed in their best brown baggies and their platform soles. They don't give a damn about any trumpet playing band. It ain't what they call rock and roll. And the Sultans, oh, the Sultans, they play Creole. Creole.